Good evening, and thank you so much for making time to join us for this edition of Spectrum Extra, live on Radio 1 FM 90. This being a Friday, we review the major events of the week. We'll be looking at the Kenyan situation and the lessons other countries can draw from there. We know there's been action and reaction in Kenya, where we had widespread public dissatisfaction. Kenyan President William Ruto on Wednesday refused to sign into law a controversial finance bill that led to nationwide protests. People opposed the bill, which introduced a number of taxes, saying that it was going to complicate further the cost of living and also affect their lives in different proportions. So on Wednesday, the president came out after massive protests in Nairobi and other cities to announce that he would not sign that bill. Unfortunately, a number of people had already lost their lives. The protests organized by the young people had spread rapidly to different parts of the country. The opposition, which had walked out of parliament at the time this bill was hurriedly passed, was also backing the demonstrators. Today, we had that ruling from the court that authorized the deployment of the army on the street after it emerged that the protesters seem to have a new agenda, which includes pushing for the resignation of the government of Kenya. As the country, we were affected. You know, they say when Kenya catches a cold, we have to sneeze. There was an impact on business, and some people have raised concerns about Uganda relying heavily on the Kenyan route to transport its commodities. But also, we saw that situation where the first floor of Uganda House in Nairobi was actually set ablaze. So some people have been actually saying that the Kenyan situation presents a lesson to many African countries when it comes to issues of the economy, taxation, and how you respond to public discontent. We'll be looking at that issue in detail. We'll also be looking at the national budget saga in our country, but also the concern around what some people are calling budgeting for corruption. We know President Yoweri Museveni has refused to sign the appropriation bill for the 2024-2025 national budget because he disagrees with the decision by Parliament to reallocate 750 billion shillings. According to the documents we have actually seen, Parliament, in its wisdom, thought that this money, which had been spent, allocated to different dockets, needed to be spent elsewhere. They believed that the priorities lied elsewhere, so they moved the money to what they thought was useful. But the president said they did so without the authority or the involvement of the executive. Some people have said this could be a lie because the executive was represented in parliament by ministers at the time the budget was actually being appropriated. We also know there have been complaints about some people saying that there have been some people actually saying that the budget has been inflated. You know, the budget rose from about 54 trillion shillings to actually 72.1 trillion shillings. And budget experts have been saying it tantamounts to budgeting for corruption because some resources have actually been placed there for people to share. And the President Yoweri Museveni has been talking about the syndicate between Minister of Finance, accounting officers, and Parliament. And we know already there are some members of Parliament who are facing trial in the anti-corruption court. But also, on the fight against corruption, people have been taken aback by statements attributed to the Speaker of Parliament, Anita Among, and some MPs while in Mulongo district, where they addressed a function. That constituency is represented by Sisi Namuju, who is one of those MPs under trial. And while at a function there, in their speeches, they say that leaders who take public resources but share it with their people or constituents are good leaders. And some people have been wondering what this means for the fight against corruption. Time allowing, we'll look at the national census results. President Yoweri Museveni yesterday did launch preliminary results of the national census, which indicates that our population has actually increased. Majority of the people actually majority of the population is comprised of young people. What does this mean for the country going forward? I have a panel of four. Let me introduce the Honorable Simon Mulongo, governance and security expert, who did represent Bubulo East in Parliament and served as the deputy head of the African Union Mission in Somalia. Good evening, Honorable, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening so much, and thank you, our good listeners and meeting colleagues.
Thank you very much for making time to be with us here. Mr. Nicholas Opiyo, team leader at Chapter 4, Uganda, human rights lawyer, pundit on governance and human rights issues. Good evening and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. Good evening to the listeners and to my fellow panelists. I have just arrived in town from Karamoja, where I spent the last week. Just visiting the countryside and speaking to people about what they are going through. So I'm delighted to share the platform. Tired though I am, glad to be here.
Thank you very much for making time to be with us. Our third panelist, Ms. Perry Aritua, Executive Director, Women Democracy Network, Uganda Chapter, lawyer and pundit on governance and human rights issues. Thank you very much for making time once again to be with us on this platform.
Thank you, Kenneth. Good evening, listeners, viewers, and my fellow panelists.
The Honorable Stephen Mukitale Birawa, Executive Board Member at the National Planning Authority. He is a proponent of national dialogue, immediate former of Lisa County MP. Thank you very much, Honorable, for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Kenneth, fellow panelists, viewers and listeners of Radio 1 Spectrum Xtra. Nice being back at home after some time in Greece, where the Karuma Bridge got problems, and people were being reminded the shortcut between Bunyoro and Acholi is always Parao, where they used to meet and hunt their hippos.
Game meat.
So the shortcut is there. I want to appeal to Katumba, Honorable Minister Katumba Wamala and the UA. Let's allow our people to interact the way they used to be.
No, but
from
Kenneth,
West Nile, people from...
But Kenneth, this is a serious matter. I crossed this bridge this morning, months after the bridge was shut down. There is no single brick being moved at the bridge, and people's lives are being impacted. The cost of business, of transporting goods from Kampala to Gulu, has nearly doubled. The inconvenience that people have to suffer, the long hours of the trip, either through Para or through Soroti. If this was happening in other parts of the country, there would be more outrage. But what is happening in Karuma is, I think for me, a very sad thing, because that's a trading route for South Sudan. Forget about the large population in the north, from West Nile to Lango to Acholi, that use that bridge. It's a trading route for South Sudan. We are inflicting on our own selves injury. I took a video, which I will share later, of that bridge. There's no single individual walking on the bridge. It's a sad situation.
As of last week,
the point I was making as a planner is that it's important to have alternative routes. You can imagine without Para Bridge, it would be a very big problem. Without the other route to the north. And we experienced this much earlier in the war. We knew when Konyi took over part of that prong and the rest. People used to pass Masindi and go to Wanseko. So it's really important that we seriously invest into alternative routes, into multimodal transport. People of Acholi much earlier used to commute from Butiaba through Pakwach, and then the others continue to Rhino Camp up to Nimule. That river Nile is navigable up to Nimule, Sudan. So a lot of cargo would even, and then Pakwach, I would want to see that train back so that a lot of cargo can move by. The cheapest mean anyway is water.
No, I think now that you're the NPA, maybe you can solve that problem.
Actually,
I think
is the plan.
he's in charge of infrastructure and physical projects.
And what is maintenance of these facilities? Because I'm sure the new Karuma was not
maintained.
And gentlemen and ladies, I have seen his yellow file.
yellow plastic
Is the national color.
You know, when this thing happened in Masaka,
international color.
when the bridge in Masaka had a problem, we moved everything else to create an alternative route to allow people to pass and build back the bridge. I don't know what UNRWA and the rest of this panel are doing
as
about
of
Karuma.
last week, I saw an update from UNRWA. They indicated that they had identified a contractor to handle that
Karuma.
bridge. We only hope that...
It's been more than 3
My
months, Kenneth.
disappointment in 2013-14 was that we had wanted the Karuma energy project
To
to
include
also include a bridge.
And then what
And
happened?
some of us were shut up because we were saying we read over Kasombo, multi-purpose schemes.
Anyway, that's my whining about Karuma. I'm sorry to distract you.
But we'll use our resources much better.
Just to respond to
Yes, Honorable, what has been happening where you were?
Councillor Nick, Councillor Nick, his concern is that we're not talking loud enough about Karuma.
Not doing anything.
We are not doing a
Not
lot.
talking because he said if it was somewhere else, they would be making a lot of hullabaloo. But you can see how this table is organized. There are over the 5 people, 4 are Karumarists. So,
I think it's only 2.
Is this me and my sister?
Exactly.
you're Karumarists.
You know, I'm
Sometimes I do.
for nation building.
I have had to go with the patients to hospital.
Always have a national
Referred from Kiriandongo for treatment. So from time to time I go through Karuma.
Without Karuma is
Bridge.
nothing, isn't it?
Well, gentlemen and ladies, let's jump into our discussion. We also what was happening in Kenya, our neighbors, and how the situation finally came to an end. First of all, I'll begin with you, Nicholas Opiyo. What's your take about what happened after all these protests? We suddenly saw the president coming out and saying, I will not be signing this. But some people have actually said he didn't have to wait for us to go through what happened. What's your take?
Actually, I think it was Andrew Karamaji who said, you do not thank an arsonist for putting out the fire he started in the first place. And I think there could never be anything more accurate than that. But let's not get lost in what has happened in the last couple of weeks. Let's step back and ask, how did we get here? What happened in the past? Ruto and his deputy president came to power on a populist slogan of hustlers, promising that they would transform the lives of common Kenyans. If you remember very well, he rolled a wheelbarrow to show how connected he was to the ordinary wananchi. But he also said he was going to break an hegemony, a 2-family hegemony of Kenyatta and the Uhuru family.
And the Kikuyus and Jaluos.
Yes, and so that was the promise he made. But I think quite quickly when they took power, he did 2 things. I think for me, first, he began to distance himself from the economic policies of a government where he was vice president, right? And began to blame everything else on his colleague who was the president and tried to set himself apart. In fact, he argued that in the years leading up to the election, he really wasn't involved in governance, pointing to the conflict that they had with his president. And so he set upon a path of a populist, but quickly realized just how deep a problem they were in. First, broke all promises he made to Kenyans. This hustler thing, what he called bottom up, really became real bottom up in like falling with your butt down, as opposed to the economic policy he meant. Inflation, prices went up in Kenya. There were even speculation of debt default for the country. And so what does he do? He does 2 things in my view. First, he completely catapults to become the darling of the West, right? He signed an agreement with the U.S. to open up a U.S. military base. He was treated to a White House breakfast, a first for many African leaders.
After 14, 16 years.
Yeah, after about 15 years, right? He gets a state breakfast, becomes a darling of the West. He's at the economic, he's at the World Economic Forum. He's addressing the European Parliament, all in the desire to attract foreign capital to salvage what was a suffering economy. But he does a second thing, and this is common with all IMF and World Bank funding, is that there are conditions that call for restructuring. And so what does he do? They say you must raise domestic revenue. The reason for raising domestic revenue is not for the benefit of Kenya, but to make sure you are a good debtor, you can pay back your debt. So what does
servicing.
Debt servicing. What does he do? He then comes back and proposes a tax bill that is really, really far-reaching for Kenyans. And I think at that point, the broken promises and the tax bill, the Kenyans had it. And then what do they then do? For a long time, if you went to Kenya, I was in Kenya about 2.5 weeks ago, my taxi driver from the airport couldn't help but talk about the tax bill, the proposed finance bill, the impact of taxes on Kenyans. And the example he gave me was quite extreme, which was that it required, if you are going to renew a third-party license for your vehicle which you own, you not only pay for the third-party license, but there's an additional tax on a car that you own already. And for him, as a taxi driver, that was just too much for him to handle. I met lawyers who are aligned to the ruling government, who we had dinner with, and all they could talk about was taxes. One of them actually suggested to me that her mother's avocado trees are going to be taxed if this tax bill passes. That's how extreme it was. And so the Kenyans, I think, had reached a point where there was just broken promises, there was just hardships, and led to what you saw on the street, that ordinary people marching out to protest a finance bill that had far-reaching implications on their lives. But what was also really, for me, quite interesting is who are the drivers of this demonstration. Largely young people, largely using social media and speaking the language that ordinary young person in Kenya understands. There were largely people from the urban slums and urban, well, we call them people experiencing poverty. You don't say poor people.
From
People
the ghetto.
experiencing poverty, led this demonstration. But the second thing on top of that is the response of the Kenyan institutions. You have professional associations of doctors, of sex workers, of prostitutes, of lawyers, all coming out to support
Are you being
this.
sexist?
No, there was a press statement from the Kenya Sex Workers Association. And I'm talking about this from the lawyers, from
even the medical
doctors and everybody. I'm not being sexist at all. This is a real thing.
Yeah.
And
The
for me,
petitioners in court.
No, they are supporting the demonstration.
they are supporting the demonstration.
It was a simple question of clarity.
And you saw how everybody, people who couldn't go on the streets, recorded videos on social media. You had people supplying water. You had people treating injured people. And I think the solidarity and the response from Kenyan institutions was just incredible, including the Kenyan police, who, for the large part, exercised restraint.
Yeah.
You saw demonstrators dancing before
Provocation.
armed police officers who maintained their calm and quickly dealt with that situation.
And they even offered some demonstrators water to wash their
They
faces.
did, they did. So it was a sharp contrast with how the police in Uganda would respond to a demonstration like that. Admittedly, at some point, things got out of hand, people were killed. But I think broadly speaking, you saw an institution that was alive to its mandate, which is to facilitate peaceful protest, not to stop it or to regulate it. Only when it got violent did they, I think in some instances, kill a couple of people. Lastly, then, you saw the reemergence of the real Ruto that people perhaps didn't know. A populist now claiming he had no idea that people didn't like a bill that he actually set up himself and pushed down the throat of his MPs in Parliament. He literally threw the MPs under the bus. The MPs now are in a difficult position.
Yeah.
You told them to pass a law that you wanted. You passed the law. Now you say, oh, I didn't know. So MPs' homes are being attacked. MPs are kneeling before constituents. People are being chased out of pulpits in churches, at funerals. So they're in a difficult situation. But the second thing that Ruto has begun to do is disappearances. So many people who are leading these demonstrations have begun to disappear. In the same way, witnesses of the ICC disappeared. And some of them have re-emerged, but a couple of them are still missing. And there's continued worry that is going to be what will define the government's response to the protest in Kenya.
Well, Nicholas, staying with you, one of the historical things I've heard from Kenyans say is how security at Parliament was actually breached to the extent that the demonstrators made it to the chambers, and even one of them moved away with the mess. What's
The symbol of
that
authority.
implication there? What message does that carry?
Parliamentary.
No, I mean it's the extent, and I think for me, sometimes you would think that the police force in Kenya had the ability to do what our police forces here do,
I've actually heard, is it the secretary in charge of internal affairs being blamed? Is this the head of intelligence? I saw that the deputy president of Kenya actually blaming them.
I mean, Nordin is just an innocent soul. He's just a scapegoating. But what they had the capacity to do what the Ugandan police would do, but they didn't. Allowed people to demonstrate and even get into the flow of the house. Maybe that got overboard, but the fact that that happened itself should tell you that they allow the people to express themselves. Breaking into the house, vandalizing, the canteen, the mess is an extreme action, and every demonstrations have people who would take advantage of that situation to wreak havoc. And it happened itself is a strong statement to the MPs that they are out of touch with the constituents in Kenya, and that perhaps when you see in Uganda it was the SFC that raided Parliament and beat up MPs. In Kenya it was ordinary citizens who said, "All right, we've had it."
Spectrum Xtra on Radio 1 FM 90. Let's go for a break now. Nicholas has given us a good background. We now understand clearly what prompted these demonstrations and how it actually concluded. So when we return, we'll try to look at the key ingredients inside this development in Kenya and how other countries can actually take lessons from it. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum Xtra continues after this break.
Spectrum Xtra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum Xtra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
Well, Spectrum Xtra on Radio 1 FM 90, review of the major events of the week. Our focus now is on the Kenyan situation and the lessons that other countries can actually get from there. We've already heard from Mr. Nicholas Opiyo, team leader at Chapter for Uganda. Also in studio, we have Honorable Stephen Mukitale, executive board member at NPA, former Lisa County MP. In studio also, we have Ms. Berry Aritua, executive director at Women Democracy Network, Uganda Chapter. Also in studio, the Honorable Simon Mulongo, governance and security expert, who represented Bobulo East in Parliament. And I'll come to you, Honorable Mulongo. I know you've had a chance to work and even stay in Kenya for quite some time. And some people have been actually saying that what we are seeing in Kenya is the freedom and the different way they do their things. I saw on social media tags like Kenya is not Uganda, Uganda is not Kenya, all those kinds of discussions going on. Of course, most people in Uganda here seem to be enthusiastic about what was happening in Kenya. But your take?
Honorable Mulongo sort of belongs to both Kenya and Uganda.
Yeah, we belong to East Africa. That's perfect. But I also know that you're Congolese.
I'm greatly.
I think, Mr. Moderator, I just liked what Comrade Opiyo Council was laying things. And he was treading quite like a careful line, making some comparison of sorts, but trying to make his point. The fact is that it is a shock, that what happened in Kenya is a shock because the degree to which the response occurred was so impulsive. One can wonder whether it was organic or it was just from nowhere, and was it organized? Did it organize itself in the cause as it ensued? Did it have some leadership structure? Did it have facilitation? Could people sustain such demonstrations day in, day out, night out? And they do that for a week, which is actually even growing in strength and expanding to the countryside. This is a fundamental question that we need to know. And we need to derive lessons from that. Did the intelligence come to know about this? Did they, even in the course of the explosive mass protests, come to identify the structures of these groups? Did they have leadership at all? Were they coordinated in any way? Did they use on the social media? Because we could see trucks and trucks of vehicles, bringing people into town. And I spoke to some parents in Nairobi. They're saying, our son has gone. Our son is also gone. It's the youths who have gone. It's like the parents who were favorable when were in for it, for their kids to really to go out there.
Another Mau.
So I think, to me, there are a number of things we need to take note of. One is that the anger seemed to be really widespread.
Yeah.
And you're talking like it is over. To me, I'm not aware that it's over. It's continuing up to now. Even today in Kisumu, in the whole route, some colleague of mine, a general from this country, drove very bravely from Nairobi yesterday, and he came. He had to carry some twigs so that he looked like he's also with them, and then they could sort of allow him to pass. Then we'll get a border to make him, circumvent some parts of the roads. And so the thing is still ongoing, even despite the statements that have come out. One, criminalizing the issue. Secondly, initially it was to resist, to say that as government we cannot change our position. Then later on, when things became so bad, started criminalizing, realized that did not solve the problem, it even worsened it. Then they says, retracted that the people of Kenya have spoken and they're speaking X, Y, Z, therefore we have to change. People did not cease. And even when you say, we now concede.
Could that be a nomination?
So,
because there's a call now for the government actually to fall.
Yes, and that's what I'm coming to. That it means that the objective of these riots were not to do with the bill.
All right.
The objective, right from the beginning, chanting were Ruto out. They never came out to say just the finance bill. They said Ruto out.
Actually, they have even given him a name, Zakayo.
Yes, he's Zakayo because of taxation in the Bible. He's a liar, he's a betrayer, and so on. So I want to agree with Nick to the extent that immediately he came into power, he never walked the talk. The Mama Mboga, the hustler people were abandoned. And even if there are some provisions in the budget for them, they're not clear. Instead, a lot of taking away from them was more pronounced in the structure than actually them getting some reliefs and support. So to me, the whole thing is that the budget 2024-2025 came in a manner that was totally foreign to Kenyans. And he seemed to have really succumbed to the Western imperialism. And you remember we discussed this here, and then we said he has sold the soul and the spirit of Kenya. When he went to the West, he was absorbed totally. And so the IMF and World Bank seized the opportunity to really do the usual gimmicks of really impoverishing the people harder, having their money recouped because of the debts, and whatever happens, that's your business. And the Kenyans who are quite alert. And to me, that is one of the warnings. The other one is the organization. There must have been something more than social media organization. Yes, it was spontaneous. Yes, people were angry because the previous finance bill, which came into finance law, it really introduced a number of taxes that hurt people. And now this made it worse because this was like time 3, the previous one. So people were already very angry with the way they had handled taxation. And they really structured the taxation into an informal, because our economic systems are still rather informal in many ways. And comrade economists will tell you that whereas we've tried to formalize our economic structures and systems, there's a lot of informality. So when you go to tax cuts and the cows and fruits and all this, it goes to the nerves of the people. And already that had not healed. Now they brought much more structured way of taxation. So the anger was there.
All right.
The other one is the recent politics. Ruto just got one, how much? 50.5. And which means actually 49.5 were against him. And the way they handled him, because remember they were trying to fail him at all means, taking away his security detail, cooking up some evidence against him for nothing, trying to let him some corruption cases, some of which were just lies, and going after his investments. Now, he just wanted to do the same. He did the same to the Kenyatta family. He did the same to some other people from central Kenya, and that had angered them. I can tell you, I have information that some families who are not supporting Ruto came up to sponsor some of these riots.
All right.
And that means that it has now gone political. And they're using that to say now, let's take advantage of this to actually root him out of the State House. And people are still planning to go to State House, main State House. Places like Mombasa, where people were running into it, They were trying to overrun Nakuru State House, and you're telling me about 10 people. In Nakuru alone, I think there are about 19 people who were killed.
All right.
Yeah, so the numbers are quite much higher than what you're saying. So to us, the question is, why didn't the police come to know what was happening? The intelligence services, they were not fully aware. Even the response was not the best. And of course, Nick has just given them a very good credit that he was smiling with the people. To me, I saw a mix-up of helplessness, lack of organization, even if they knew that the people also rioting in line with the new constitution of 2010, which provides for it.
All right. Let's hear from Honorable Mukitale. Your take on this issue. Ruto actually coming and saying he will not be signing, but also gave other concessions, including cutting his own budget and asking the judiciary and other government departments even to consider cutting down on their expenditure. Some people said it presented a moment of weakness, but others actually say he read the signs clear and that probably he acted the right way. What your take on that?
In 2005, I was in Amref, Nairobi, when we were in the Blair Commission for Africa, and I went among those who were here. Actually, I went with Dr. Keleman and others, and Godward himself and others. And I did warn. At that time, there was this. I have always been against winner takes all. I was warning the Kibaki group when they were celebrating the having been victors against the Moi vanquished team. And I warned them, I said, I don't think it is proper if you don't have some semblance of building bridges, you are going to have a problem. It did not last 2 years and they had a crisis. And they solved their problems through that dialogue they had, and which culminated into a lot of constitutional amendment. That's why you see when people in Uganda are wondering, how can the IGP fail to command? The IGP is not appointed by the president. The job is advertised. You compete, and the public is allowed to vet you. Even when you are in the interviews, the whole world is watching, equal of electoral commission. So the powers of the president were trimmed during that process. Now, what I fail to understand is that Ruto, who yesterday introduced this politics of this using the young people and being violent, could forget that you only have 50.5 against 49.5, and you come up with a winner takes all. I will not negotiate. There is no handshake. There is no. Remember, in the last term, he opposed his boss on the Building Bridge Initiative, which some of us we thought was going to again consolidate the gains of the earlier constitutional amendment. Now he's paying a price for it. So at the time before you settle the problems at home, you want to fly in foreign policy as a darling of the West. You know? He has deployed in Haiti. He has deployed in Haiti. Can you imagine? Possible that would be the first to be deployed back at home. So the guy did not read the temperatures at home. He got so excited. He went into that being a new kid on the block in terms of foreign policy. He got all the accolades from the US. Even this bill is a product of an IMF bill. How they intend to show that Kenya can pay their debts. And of course, we have been admiring the infrastructure in Nairobi. A lot of things have been done. You can easily reach the airport, but it was very costly. So, because of this debt stress, debt crisis, you cannot. It comes at a cost of your social services. It comes at a cost of other what you would give to the health, to the education, to the community, and that puts his government in that corner. But also, again, as an advocate of national dialogue, the vice president team are hardliners. They were vindictive. They took personal vendetta. How do you go to attack the mother of Uhuru Kenyatta? At least attack the wife of. Yeah, you can say one, but Mama Kenya,
Mama Ngina.
Mama Ngina, Mama ya Taifa. You go that far, follow her, have farm deep in that you're trying to show them that you can engage them. So they made a lot of mistakes, and sometimes you reap what you sow. So he came to politics by being, you remember how he ended up in the ICC? He is violent himself. Yes, there was, for us who have been in Kenya before, there were Mungikis before, but he came up, his rise is from those dubious things.
All right.
And now it is being paid against him. So that's why for me as an advocate of national dialogue, I always don't want. Yes, I am an advocate of freedom of assembly, demonstrations, as long as there is no violence, as long as they don't become riots, as long as, and things, really, I want to appreciate the professionalism of the Kenyan police and the army. They really were too patient. They were too patient, but it reached a point when they could not. And the moment he conceded, I think to some extent it was also tactical, because this is a man of so many styles. I think they were yet to see the real Ruto now.
All right.
I think by the time he conceded, we thought he was remorseful. It was a chance to deploy. That's why you see immediately after that, there were deployments everywhere.
All right.
Watch the space.
All right.
Those who are saying it's not just about the bill, they want the State House, they may face more ruthless Ruto.
We have a comment coming in from Benon Fretwin Amasko said President Ruto wanted to play the newcomer trick and blame debt burden on the previous regime, but the GNZ, that's the people who organized the protests, reminded him that he was deputy president when insane borrowing was ongoing. Perry, let's hear your view.
Generation Z.
Yeah. Thank you, Kenneth. You know, when you're elected, you have a social contract with citizens. So a number of the issues that the Generation Z is raising are actually issues that affect economic and financial inclusion. And you know, it's funny, there are a lot of similarities in terms of his proposals to Uganda. I was just looking through some of the proposals. One, he wanted to create chief administrative secretary positions, and the Generation Z is saying this will impose a further financial burden. Secondly, they're also complaining about the MPs' allowances and saying that these savings instead should be directed to critical sectors like health and education. And you know, their population is also majorly young. Many are also suffering from unemployment. The third was mandatory jail terms for corruption. And they are saying introduce a mandatory term of 5 years for those convicted of looting public funds, with recovery of all stolen funds and no out-of-court settlements. Then they're also saying redirect savings to health and education. And then, of course, they are saying withdraw certain levies. But also when they are speaking about social and governance reforms, they are saying that there are a number of issues affecting young people which must be addressed. And one of the things they are saying is you can't charge someone 1,000 Kenya shillings for renewal, for replacing an ID. And the argument was that nationality should not expire. And those are some of the things we have been saying.
Discussions going on.
Then they're also saying reform the IEBC, the Electoral Commission, that the law should be amended to allow a recall of MPs. That's the same thing we have been saying here, you know, because under our current constitution, you can't recall your member of parliament. Then they are also saying that ensure employment for intern doctors and teachers from junior secondary school, those teachers that they need to be, employment needs to be guaranteed.
So
and
there were more other underlying issues.
Exactly, and they have been saying these things for long. I have a sister who lives in Kenya. This housing levy, no, you know, under Uhuru, they had actually substituted prices like of posho, I think vegetable oil. So there are things that were affordable for the ordinary Kenyan. So this has been brewing. But for me, it goes back to the fact that when we're elected, your role is to ensure that you serve the people. So you cannot be living a very extravagant lifestyle. He was busy renovating state houses. When people are telling you that taxes are killing us, you're introducing new taxes. And I think for me, just the brazenness of the MPs continuing to have these conversations when the population is saying, look, you know, that means they're out of touch with the citizenry. And for me, it goes back to the fact that when you're a representative, that word must hold meaning for the African states. You're not there on your own volition. People have given you their power to represent them. So when they're telling you things are hard and you're going ahead to live a lavish lifestyle, you know, Kenyan MPs are one of the best paid. And then these young people are saying, our parliament is too big. That's exactly what we are saying in Uganda. You cannot be cash-strapped and you keep increasing the number of members of parliament.
So we're talking about Kenya.
Yes, and you know the interesting thing, that's why I'm saying there's a lot of similarity in terms of Kenya and Uganda.
Because lessons from what happened
They
in
were
Kenya.
Exactly, and you know the interesting thing is that one of their demands is reduce the number of MPs. That's what Gen Z was saying, because they have a big cost. And that's exactly the lesson we need to learn in Uganda. Because Kenneth's question is, what lessons do you learn? You know, we need to respond to the issues that citizens talk about. If they're telling you, stop creating, for instance, we just had assistant RDCs. For what? You know, all that's a big tax burden. So when you remove money from social services, of course you're going to make people angry. If you have a small tax base and you're taxing the same citizenry who is struggling while you're living lavishly, you know. So for me, it's really just saying for all African governments that forget that their role is to manage public affairs on behalf of their citizens. This is a lesson. And that you don't want to reach a level where citizens go to the streets. Address the problems. If they are saying, look, the tax burden is high because you're spending a lot on public administration, listen. Instead of, you know, making them feel like their voices don't matter. So those are some of the lessons for me that I would pick. That this young generation is not like the older generation where they continue to hope things improve. They are desperate, you know, for changes in terms of their life. The intern doctors whom they are recommending should get immediate jobs. These doctors have been complaining for long. They have been going on strike. So there are a lot of similarities to Uganda. I think the only difference is he has tried to respond. I don't know how long it will last. The unfortunate thing about disappearances, that should not really happen.
All right, we have a comment coming in from Richard. Good evening, Spectrum Extra. I have seen many Ugandans online applauding Kenya police for restraining. A friend of mine in Nairobi says it's much more pain than the camera and the microphone can tell. Many people have been murdered, and that's what caused agitation for continuous riots, even when the bill was dropped. Ruto's withdrawal of security from Mamangina and security attack on residents of Uhuru's son was way beyond the masked Christian that Ruto projects. Nicholas Opiyo, one would ask, why is the African leader detached from the people that actually gives them the mandate? Perry raises a very important issue here. Who do they represent?
No, you see, ordinarily on paper, of course, power belongs to the people. People can exercise that power and determine how they should be governed. That's the theory. But I think that a couple of things, and you can see how tone deaf some of these leaders are. Ruto took a private jet to go to the US. Yes. And when he was asked about it, he said, his friends in Saudi paid for it. And so when they asked his friends in Saudi, no, we didn't pay for any jet. But even if they had paid, why would they pay for a private jet for the president of Kenya to go for a state function in the US? So they just become tone deaf. The common thing about them is they also hide behind Christianity, and they have spouses who are prayerful, you know.
You mean the whole of Africa? Or
no, I'm talking about Uganda and Kenya.
I saw the one of Kenya.
Uganda and Kenya, you have their daughters and, you know, that kind of stuff. The only thing is that Uhuru has no son equivalent to ours. But you can see that the manipulation of religious,
Ruto.
a friend like ours.
Ruto.
A son like...
I think there was a slip of a tongue. You said Uhuru. And
I know yes.
My sincere apologies.
Yes.
My sincere apologies. And so you can see the manipulation and use of religion and faith as a tool to mask, what is really malified actions of state leaders. But I think they face a dilemma, and that dilemma is also faced by us here in Uganda. Kenya's GDP is estimated to be about $494 billion. Uganda's GDP
10 times bigger.
is estimated to be about $215 billion. In ordinary speak, Museveni is running a kiosk. Ruto is running a whole factory supermarket. In terms of the size of the size of the economy.
Kiosk.
I'm just giving you a visual representation. It's a large economy compared to ours. And I think the challenge that he has had to face is really you should go and read a book that is called, The Underground Empire. That financial transactions anywhere around the world come to a throttle, a point in which they can close it and open it. The same thing with the internet. Comes to a point, the global knowledge economy, where it is throttled at one point. And the people who control that throttle really are intent on holding on to your neck until and people like Ruto have come face to face with that. Uganda makes a pretense about it by making empty statements, but if you look at the figures, we rely on foreign capital, both government and the private sector. Without foreign capital, we are kaput. And so you get to a point where you have to face the global neo-colonial masters who have put together a very neat system of financial controls that they can turn it off and on when they want. And people like Ruto are now having to struggle with that. This empty rhetoric of Pan-Africanism has to confront the reality of this infrastructure that these guys have put in place. That is why a nondescript place in Brussels is the headquarters of the SHIFT system, right? And it's controlled by American banks. That's why a nondescript place in Northern Virginia is the epicenter of global communications. That's why London is important. It's not for a joke. And these leaders have to face that and make the difficult choice to either cut their nose to spite their face, or play game. And Ruto is playing game on steroids.
Well, Spectrum Xtra on Radio 1 FM 90. We are reviewing the major events of the week. My guest this evening, Ambassador Simon Mulongo, governance and security expert, Ms. Perry Aritua, executive director at Women Democracy Network, Mr. Nicholas Opiyo, team leader at Chapter 4 Uganda, Honorable Stephen Mukitale Birawa, executive board member at the National Planning Authority. We're going to go for a break now. When we return, we'll wind up the discussion on this particular topic and then move on to our next topic, which will be closely here home, the fight against corruption and the manner in which the national budget is actually being handled. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. We continue after this break.
Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
Thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra live on Radio 1 FM
What's
90
up,
review
man?
of the events of the week. Well, keep your comments coming via WhatsApp line, which is 0703-090-090. My name is Kenneth Lukwago, your host. And let's look at some feedback coming in here. We have a comment from Ziwa listening in from Matuga and said, I'm glad your panel has lawyers. There's a big difference between our Uganda Law Society and the Kenya Law Society. I believe Kenya is a better democracy than Uganda. The respect of institutions, law and order is higher in Kenya. The Kenyan Law Society is working for its people. Thanks for the show. That's a comment coming in from Ziwa, who is listening in from Matuga. We have a comment coming in from our very own Imam Idi Kasozi, who says, tell Perry Aritua that the appointment of assistant RDCs in Uganda is a form of corruption, and whoever did it is the chief of corruption in Uganda. And he says we are having a nice discussion, and he appreciates the panel. Honorable Mulongo, let me come to you as we continue looking at this Kenyan situation. Where do you see this ending? Now that we have the bill withdrawn, we have concessions, the president saying he's cutting actually on his expenditure. We have a population that seems to be still charged. Can we avoid violence where we have reached at this point? What can the region do? Because, once something happens in Kenya, we are likely to be affected. And I'll be coming to you, Honorable Mukitale. People have been complaining about relying on the route from Kenya for supplies here. And people have been saying we need to take a lesson and think beyond what we have today. Honorable Mulongo.
Yes. As I told you at the beginning, the objective for this rioting was
Protests.
more than or protests. Yes, were more than just meeting the eyes. Not about just the budget of 2024-25. It was to do with the
unfinished business?
Yes, unfinished business
Okay.
in the elections. And as such, even the continuing now, even if President Ruto has managed to concede, he has even tried to explain that he's now going to do a lot of cuts, starting with the presidential space and other members of the executive and other agencies and ministries and departments. There are still people on the streets rioting. They want
protesting.
They're protesting. Protesting.
Let's put it in the Kenyan context.
Yes, they're protesting. Whatever the difference, but they're protesting and using riots as a means of protesting. Now, the issue is that the intent was quite different. The intent was taking the advantage of this as a trigger, of the budget as a trigger, to which they're very angry actually, to cause change, regime change. That's the lesson. But the other one is the action on the part of law enforcement. While I applaud them for being very flexible, very friendly in some instances, they overwhelmed and did not actually manage well. In the end, they started shooting people with live bullets. I didn't see the evidence of effective use of rubber bullets, for example. And I could see even if they're using some colored water and all this, but the whole way the planning and execution of the reaction by law enforcement lacked a lot. And to this, I see the Ugandan security forces being much, much more effective. But it's unfortunate that they lost people, they lost young people, and so on. Some of whom I've talked to, and they told me they were very peaceful, including going to Parliament. They're claiming the fire was set by police. I'm not sure how true this one is. But the way they entered Parliament, they were actually violent because they overran all the barriers and went to Parliament, and they had to smoke those people out. They had to use some underground tunnels to evacuate the members of Parliament. And those who escaped in ambulances, they were discovered and they were really stoned badly. Because they were running away. So to me, you can't tell me that this was
The
just
MPs who were running.
There's a comment here making rounds on social media from Charles Onyango Obo. I don't know if you saw it. It said, in the wake of the GZ protests, the High Court of Kenya has issued a ruling that prohibits the police from using water cannons, tear gas, live ammunition, rubber bullets, or any other crude weapons against peaceful protesters. To say Kenya is complicated would be a great understatement.
Yes, the issue is, I don't know if there's an overstatement then, if it's complicated. The issue is that the new constitution, you need to look at it. Its provisions guarantee peaceful protesting.
Just like ours.
The actual is much more elaborate than ours. And the youths are insisting they're following that faithfully. So,
and to add information, they had all the support of former President Uhuru on that.
And even Raila.
I didn't want to go into those names, but I told you that I am aware of people who
must listen to the voters.
Yes, who actually are being facilitated and being supported to do what they are doing, because to them it was a chance to clear the score that was never. Then the other one is, as a region, we must know that the youth are a very volatile group. If you look at the population outcome, the people who are below 15 years are close to 50% in this country. In other words, over 20 million people in Uganda are actually below 15%. And these people are so amenable to social media communication and so on, so they're capable of transmitting information instantly, that the actual organization can be done when they're already in the field, on the terrain, in the front line. So you don't have to wait to calculate to find out the leaders and so on. The only difference here is, like it happened in Egypt, happened in Sudan, any organization of this type that has no proper structures and leadership is bound to just evaporate. Because at the end of the day, who is now going to engage government? At the end of the day, how are they going to realize this? As you can see, President Ruto is calling shots based on his assessment. He's not being engaged to say, adjust this, do this. He's just volunteering. And as Comrade Mukitale put it, he's just calculating to calm down, and then he'll find a way of going about it as he goes by, because he requires to come back in the second term. But at the looks of things now, he can never come back. But I can tell you, he's got handled in such a manner that he will come back 2027.
We have a comment coming in from Dr. Isaac Lukwago. Said the Kenyans have taught their leaders a lesson. They will not take them for granted as ours do. Imagine corruption accusations in the Ugandan parliament, yet the parliamentary leadership is unbothered, but still posturing with silly and crimsy excuses. Well, Honorable Mukitale, Uganda House, first floor, was put on flames. Business, our cargo was affected, and some people have actually been talking about how we need to think wider, because this is not the first time we have a situation in Kenya affecting us. What kind of interventions do we need to do in terms of lessons to avoid this kind of complication that we face from time to time wherever there are issues in Kenya?
First of all, I was ending my last submission by saying that while in opposition, let's avoid the radical, fanatical, and extreme position. The institutions you want to kill, the channels of negotiations you want to kill because you're in opposition, you may need them when you come to government. And this is what Ruto is suffering from. He was so extreme. He was a fundamentalist. Now he's expecting people to pay him a different they are paying him exactly the currency he deserves. And I can tell you, like I did prophesy for them last time, if Ruto is going to remain relevant, he's going to be the one to introduce the Building Bridge Initiative, which he actually
on his terms.
Now it's going to be him. To look for former President Uhuru, to look for a senior brother, Odinga, so that Kenyans can go back. The other advantage they have, before I go to our own effect, Kenya is not just Kenya. Kenya is a headquarter of so many international organizations. Kenya is the headquarter of so many intelligence, including the Israeli, the Mossad, the CIA, the bases, even bases. When you go to Mombasa there. So those forces will prevail on Kenya. And Kenya is so commercialized, unlike Uganda, where I can call my grandmother to send me 600 kgs of cassava, and I can survive in Kampala for a month. They don't have that. So for them, it is unga, sukuma wiki. So if you tamper with that economy for 2 weeks, they will
in food kiosk.
Yes, they will all break down. So we count on that. We count on that reality will prevail, and they come and say, anyway, it's also an economy, it's politics of business people, of industry. All of them have hotels. What will happen if their hotels are closed for 1 month? They will all be in problems. So I think we are counting on that. Why am I saying this? Uganda, we have already lost Uganda House. Newly renovated. We have experiences where our cargo has been touched whenever there is such a crisis. When I left Makere in 92, my first work was to receive cargo by rail, by at Good Shed here at the port, and also by road. And we always talked of alternative route. Alternative route has been a song.
Now you're an MPA. Do something.
I have sang it in Parliament.
He's an executive member of the
We have by the way, we lost the ECOP project with Lamset. Apart from that Mombasa port, Lamu can be another port, because from Acholi and Karamoja, you can actually have a very good transit route of cargo to Lamu. And that would be very good. And you can connect back to Pakwach and then also go to the areas of South Sudan. So I don't know why we always wait for a crisis to sing this song of another route. The Dar route. I don't know how this miraculous man Magufuli did not help
in
us.
NPA,
but a good thing,
in charge of infrastructure.
Right now, cargo is arriving at Mwanza. Right now, you can receive cargo from Dar to Mwanza in 3 days.
The route is on.
So I think it is now our side of Uganda to do our part. I saw, I was asking somebody, Pemba and I think the other vessel are being fixed. I hope we do it faster. We have also found money to fix Mutukula to Masaka, at least to a good standard of oil roads like the ones I have in our region. So I hope the other loop can also be fixed so that people can use an alternative route. These corridors in the East African Common Market we are supposed to be are the ones supposed to help us reach out to the new-born South Sudan, DRC, which, by the way, without it, would have had a very bad effect of the Russian war and Ukraine, would have had a very bad effect of COVID, and even other global depression. But the regional market is abandoned. So before we think of the African continent free trade, we need this Great Lakes, this East African region, to really have interconnection in terms of rail, SGR. I wish it is all seamless SGR, but we also need to maintain the old train. We need the water vessels, as I said earlier. If you have SGR and Kisumu, you can bring cargo by water. So it's really an indictment to ourselves. Let's work together and let's think as East Africans. So for us as Ugandans, as we discuss the lenient policy in Kenya, we should be mindful, because should this continue, we are not safe. It will affect us badly as an economy. It will do. Kenya is our lifeline, both for exports and imports. So we really need also to, as East Africa, I hope, I want to hear.
You send the Uganda police to pacify.
I'm wondering, this East Africa, of course,
stand by force.
We don't have a political federation yet. But what does the East African Treaty say about such a conflict? So can we learn to also intervene? Of course, the other problem, what's worrying me in Africa, even the ECOMOG and ECOWAS is collapsing. There is a collapse in West Africa. We were at one time counting on ECOMOG to come and police the region, but right now there is a lot of unilateralism in West Africa. Now, I hear in Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and the new members. Somalia, he's another friend of Somalia. Fragile states have joined us. Sorry for using undiplomatic language. I'm a trained diplomat, but I'm saying.
Talk about the republic.
The republic.
The Republic of
not
Somalia.
fragile.
Somalia.
Not failed, not fragile. Okay, I take it from you.
All right.
So with this new membership, how are they going to help us solve such a regional? Because Kenyan problem
for us to solve their problem.
The problem is not. I'm saying the problem
has come to contribute. No, they come to look for solutions.
So the Kenyan problem is not Kenyan problem. It's an East African problem, because it's a headquarter.
All right, we have comments coming in. Kenyans fought for their own independence through Mau Mau rebellion and fought against President Moi's regime. But in Uganda, independence was given to us. Under Idi Amin regime, Ugandans didn't resist Obote's and Museveni's 40 years. Shows you how Ugandans have inferiority complex or soft. That is a comment from Alan.
And then somebody said,
kindly inform Nicholas that he quoted very wrong values for GDP for Uganda and Kenya. Uganda is around $45 billion and Kenya in the regions of $113 billion. He quoted very differing figures. That's a comment from Julius. Then we have a comment from Davis. Greetings to the panelists. Looking at what happened in Kenya, we as Ugandans still have a long way to go politically. This should be an eye-opener to politicians. Then we have another one, big one for thoughts. Anderson, Raila was running for AU leadership. Where does these protests leave his stakes in the run for that position? He was being backed, financed, and campaigned for by the Ruto team. Panelists, please, can you have a comment on that?
Kenya government.
Then we have another comment. I'm Masaba Joseph from Tororo. Can the panelists talk about why the Uganda House was burnt by the rioters? Well, let's hear from you, Perry, as we conclude the discussion on this particular topic.
And I think the last person has a good question. Why not Tanzania House? As I read to you, a number of the things that this Gen Z was actually complaining about are similar to what Ugandans complain about. So when you speak to Kenyans, some of them think that we are exporting some of our bad laws and practices to Kenya. That's a fact. Many of them think so, because I was looking through the proposals by Gen Z, and I was like, a number of these things are what Ugandans complain about. So I think for us the question should be, what do Ugandans export to their neighbors, apart from goods, in terms of our politics, in terms of our governance? You know, there are things which other countries just think we are not a serious people. You know, in terms of our politics, in terms of the level of violence. Kenya, of course, has learned about not being violent in elections. They have had experiences. But many of them wonder at Uganda. You travel to, Zambia and these different countries, and they're like, what's wrong with you people? You know, how can you be governed like that? How can you tolerate a lot of this corruption and just remain normal, you know? So maybe that's the agitation and the question maybe the Mulongos should answer is why Uganda House.
Mulongo, would you like to weigh in? Honorable Mulongo.
But those are my views.
Uganda House.
Yeah.
Yes, Uganda House was burnt. This is not the embassy. The embassy is in Kileleshwa, but this is our commercial wing,
Property.
plus the consulate that deals with the administrative things to do with our diplomacy. They're best there. And the lower side is all hired out for business. Now, it's not just Uganda House which was burnt. Several buildings were set ablaze. And that's why the so-called peaceful demonstration was not. These people were very violent and they destroyed so much in Kenya. Now, why would Uganda? Yes, they were looking at Uganda. Some of the people were telling me that they associate Ruto's strength and potential strength from Uganda. Because in Kenya, if you look at the former government, the architecture there is against Ruto. But it's only our side who can actually support him. The other one was, because even the president was there before he left for America, they had a lot of deals and so on. So they're looking at Uganda, perhaps even the potentiality of Uganda coming in to strengthen the security. They were actually suspicious Uganda may send their forces. So they wanted to send a clear signal that they are not happy with us and they wouldn't want anything like my sister has just put it, that our way of leadership, ruling, response to certain things is not something to emulate. But in my view, Uganda is very effective. It wouldn't have come to that. The losses that Kenya has undergone, it will take quite a long time for them to recover. You haven't been told the destruction they did along the roads. A lot of cargo has been destroyed, some of which were coming into Uganda, others DRC, others Sudan, others to Rwanda. And besides that, the paralysis, those people are going to take a long time to recover, even their supermarkets to restock. They looted Nairobi like you've never seen. So to me, whether Uganda has an overhand, which we can criticize, but things don't many times go to a certain degree. In Kenya, you can't tell the type of destruction and losses we've gone over to.
Okay, just one
Very
sentence.
quickly, Nicholas.
One sentence.
Yes, please.
The leaders.
And maybe you should also respond to. There's one particular listener who was
About Law Society.
asking about Law Society, but also there's another one who was wondering whether this put Raila Odinga.
No, I mean, the Raila campaign will go on because the government in Kenya is still in power. Government programs will go on. I don't think that will put in
So it's not a deal between Ruto and Raila?
No, not really. I think that's going to go on. Whether he will win or not depends on other African states and how they will receive his candidacy. But law society in Kenya is much more developed than law society in Uganda in terms of just numbers of lawyers, seniority of lawyers, the vast amount of the legal economy in Kenya. It's much wider than here. But certainly, there's a stark difference between the leadership here and those in Kenya, that you have leaders in Uganda who, in the law society, who do not really, in stature and in influence and courage, do not match this kind of leaders the Kenyan law society has had over the last couple of years. That's a fact. And we must, I think, in my view, reflect how you come to a place where John Nangwala is not a senior counsel, but they want Simon Chinobe a senior counsel because he was law society president. That is the depth of decay. But the one sentence I wanted to say is this, that these leaders have no idea about this generation called Gen Z. You'll be surprised. They have ways and means that are different. They have interests that are different. These old dreams of war in the bush doesn't sell to them anymore, and you can't lie to them. You've got to look at TikTok videos of Ugandans now breaking down the budget. You got to look at people now breaking down. You can't lie to these guys. They're smart, they're agile, they're difficult to deal with.
So you're suggesting that generation is also here?
If you don't listen, they brought down a whole parliamentary speaker. This corruption scandal in parliament was broken by young people on Twitter.
We still have a speaker. What do
Okay.
you mean they brought her?
I mean, she's on the chair, but she's shrouded with all manners of doubts
Questions.
now and questions.
All right.
And you've seen what they've done with exhibitions that they're doing online.
Inspire.
This generation is different. If you don't listen to them, you may be surprised.
All right. And that brings us to the discussion about our national budget and the decision by President Yoweri Museveni actually not to assent to the appropriation bill which was sent to him over how 750 billion was reallocated by Parliament. Parliament has the power to reallocate the budget. When they see priorities elsewhere, they can move money from one place to another. But the President seems to suggest that the executive had to have a say. This discussion comes at a time when there's a lot of discussion about what some people are calling an inflated budget, budgeting for corruption, people actually putting money in there in the budget to be able to share later. But we also have questions like Nicholas Opiyo said about the leadership of Parliament, which actually handles, together with the entire House, the appropriation process. Honorable Mukitale, what could be going on here?
I don't want to dwell so much on the legal semantics, the legalese of who has the power
You don't care about the law?
of appropriation.
You don't care
No.
about the law?
I'm saying I don't want to dwell so much
Okay.
because you will miss the crux of the matter.
Okay.
What is the matter?
Yes.
The crack one.
Parliament did appropriate, and that power of appropriation is with Parliament. But the executive is the one which has powers to do allocation. So it's better when it's a win-win situation, that the executive comes with the budget framework paper, the executive looks at it through the ministerial statements. At the end of the day, you do the appropriation and the money goes to different votes. But it's not okay for Parliament, like this time it was done, in the last minute of appropriation for some 750 to have been not allocated according to government priorities, that there's some influence peddling within the committee of budget, that for me I want a health center in my Shema, another one wants this, and the money goes there. That was irregular. It must be condemned by all right-thinking citizens. But this is not just this money, because we also know there is a very big debate right now. I don't want to call it a hegemony. While at Parliament, I remember instances when we MPs and with the support of the Speaker did some expenditures which government was not comfortable with, and we were sometimes made to vomit to take back the money to the accounting officer. What I don't understand in Parliament today, and I've said this before, all these blames which is going to a Speaker who has just served few years, and Deputy Speaker, when Parliament has so many seniors, more so the clerk to Parliament. Over 20 years as a minister.
He was begging for a job to be given human rights commission.
Former Attorney General. When I went to Parliament, my first 10 trips, I did not even see my good in-law Speaker Sekandi. It was Tande Kwire. It was the expert. It was the accounting officer. Honorable Mukitale, you are very knowledgeable in this area. I want you to go for this trip.
Okay. So it was merit.
It was merit, but he was also being bribed. How to call that kind of criteria?
So seniority mattered in Parliament.
And knowledge, eh?
Competence mattered. What's your background? The guy would go and he just go to his desk. He pulls his glasses, and he tells you, I can see your ground in this area. I can see your background.
Where would you put David
Cavand?
Nicholas Opiyo going there first time. You'll never go out.
Even after the period,
Changed.
the days of Kaija, a lot of these expenditures would not require Spire to bring out. You would be checked. at the accounting officer level. So I'm hearing my speaker being, how do you start asking political leaders who are supposed to be eyes on, hands off? Because that's what we're in our training. That time, this month, the Speaker of Kenya, what was his name? Akaparo?
Olaparo.
He would come and ground you on etiquette, what do you do as an MP? You can change anything in terms of the only power you don't have is to change a man into a woman. No, they ground you in what to do. The role of an MP, the role of the technocrats, the role of the committee clerk, the role of the legal department. No, you are grounded by all these things. So now I hear everything, every blame goes to the MPs. Our MP qualification is S6. When did we start being, accounting officers? We are very lucky to have a very senior lawyer, Adolf Mweski, who has been in Attorney General's office, who has been a minister for so many things.
PS.
He has been everything. How? Minister of very important ministry. So, I find it a problem. Now, at the end of the day, what I would want to hear, that when this parliament is recalled, if the budget was less pro-people, can we see it more pro-people? 10 years ago, the president founded the Presidential Advisory Committee on the Budget, and some of us, our opposition then as founder members, was, let's bring the budget to zero. 3 years ago, COVID humbled us. COVID told us there are things we don't need in our budget. But we have so fast forgotten, and we are putting money there, and that's why this money is being stolen. Let's go back to zero in every vote, and we say UPE has problems. Health has problems. We are tired of seeing power in Karuma when it's not reaching the immediate 50 kilometers, and we are tired of West Nile not being part of Uganda because it is in an eclipse of darkness, waiting for Enrico and I don't know what.
Now you're talking.
That we can. These water vessels we have been talking about, revamp them. This irrigation we have talked about, put it there. Me, that's the debate as an advocate of national dialogue, as a person who a proponent of rationalization, restructuring, and not the way they are doing it. I want us to audit the whole mandate of government agencies. All ministries, not just a few authorities, and then those who can convince MPs, they are surviving and they still have votes. We should start from nil. 1986 NRA started from nil. And they started putting money where they thought it was important. So we cannot have priorities in an obese budget, doing business as usual.
All right.
And we are losing the debate. The debate should be 72 trillion from 258. Where did we get this other resource?
All right.
You are collecting only close to 34, but the debt obligation is 39. What resource do you have for development? That should be the debate.
All right,
but the debate is now being lost. Who has powers to take away the 750?
Let's
That's
go for
not
break.
a
When
people
we
debate.
return, we'll hear from the other panelists, the Honorable Simon Mulongo, Mr. Nicholas Opiyo, and Ms. Perry Aritua will also share their views on this issue of our national budget and the fight against corruption. Stay tuned, Radio 1 FM 90. We'll be back after these messages.
Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum Extra, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. on Radio 1 FM 90.
Thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra review of the major events of the week. My panel today, Mr. Nicholas Opiyo, the Honorable Simon Mulongo, Ms. Perry Aritua, Honorable Stephen Mukitale, and me, the host, Kenneth Lukwago Anderson. Let's come to you, Honorable Mulongo, on this issue of our national budget and the ongoing discussion and how Parliament has been projected when it comes to the issues of fighting corruption. Yet some people actually say it should be the place where systems should be operating, checks and balances, accountability, transparency, and given their crucial role as an oversight institution.
Yeah. First of all, we have rules and regulations in the House that govern the House. And they are supposed to have proper checks and balances when it comes to execution of activities of the House. But it looks like certain styles of leadership tend to overshadow how the affairs of Parliament are run internally. Because the time of the Honorable Opahabulo, it was quite different. If you look at the Right Honorable Sekandi and Right Honorable Kadaga, they kept changing somehow. And with the creation of certain pockets of power centers of sorts. And that to me becomes the beginning of undermining the way we run the affairs of Parliament. Because the styles keep changing. And you wonder what that means to the broader regulations that we're supposed to follow. What the Honorable Mukitale was referring to is true, that we must have the office of the Clerk to Parliament, which is the accounting office, and the one which is supposed to run the affairs of Parliament, administratively speaking, seems not to be the one. Because if you ask yourself what could be happening, the Right Honourable Speaker could be right, but we also want to know the role of other actors, the Commission, and then the Clerk to Parliament, because nobody seems to be mentioning the Clerk to Parliament, who is actually the key technical leader in the House. So what's the role of the Clerk to Parliament? So it's very important that we rationalize this. How do we select people, for example, going for trips and all this? I was in that house, and I can tell you I don't know. One time there was a trip that I was put on to some country somewhere in another region of this continent, and they didn't serve me with the objectives of the trip. When we reached there, they seemed not to be aware that we were coming. and then who is supposed to be handling us? So we end up ushered into the speaker's office of that country, and they were like, as if they were not ready for us.
Can we help you?
But our clerks were busy trying to talk to the clerks of the other side. It's like they are negotiating something. I feel very uncomfortable.
Okay, one time Rwanda said we are tired of your...
I said, I asked them, where is the objective? Where is the correspondence? They just kept promising me. I never saw the correspondence. So it's very possible I went to a trip that was not meant. Anyway...
That was during whose leadership?
I don't know, but... so the point is, we must, I think, learn lessons from all this. We cannot have stylized, leadership approaches that are at the mercy of a given speaker. Yeah. We must have proper rules and regulations of how business of the House is supposed to be run, including the Commission. If they don't have clear rules of how to award, let's have the criteria, let's have the budget, and the lines must be clear that we're going to award based on the performance, and the performance checklist is 1, 2, 3. But finally, the issue of the shortfall, the 750 billion, these are some of the things that are very interesting. How did it arise? Because I remember there have been some concerted efforts to discuss the budget frameworks by all organs of the state. Sometimes the president hosting the two of them, the judiciary and legislature.
There's even an advisory committee on the budget, which is a link between Parliament and the presidency.
Did somebody play around with the numbers? Because we've been wondering, sometimes you find you have discussed in the House, and if you're not careful, even the documentation of our discussions keep changing. You've passed something like this, then at the end
you're appropriating something else.
Yes, something is different. So we have to
last
be very
year was
sure.
figures.
Yes, so
Figures
really, I think it's a very
now
serious
it
one.
is.
But I want to agree also that the question of the budget to prioritize human capital development, governance, security, but also have fair allocation towards debt servicing. 34 trillion. That's quite big. It's a whooping amount of money out of 72. So which means we have to balance the act, not to have the problems of Kenya. Yes, we must pay the debts, but even those debts must be justified debts.
After paying salary and the statutory...
requirements. So to me, the structure of the budget, I know we must be clearing debts, but we must balance the boat. such that we should not forget and undermine certain sectors. And the youths, issues of employment, issues of productivity, issues of value addition, agriculture, which is the mother of all employment sectors in this country, receiving a very tiny support. Yeah. So really, to me, I think we need to avoid the explosive situation like that of Kenya by adjusting the budget to address certain key areas that will become the drivers of inspiring of our economy.
Perry, your take on this issue of the budget, but also the fight against corruption and the statements that are being made by the leaders that are supposed to lead the institution that conducts the oversight.
Thank you, Kenneth. I think the submissions of both Honorable Mulongo and Honorable Mukitale give a lot of credence to this conversation because they were in Parliament before, and in the break they are sharing examples of how it used to run in their time, some of the good practices where it was really an institution, not individuals. But maybe the question should, for us Ugandans, should be, why has corruption continued to thrive? Usually, for instance, that passage of those awards, it's because someone must have exploited a loophole in the system, maybe because there are no regulations, as the Honorable Mulongo was saying. So when someone sees there are no regulations, then they exploit that. But the other, I think, which Ugandans are struggling with is the political will to fight corruption. Because this conversation has not started today. And Ugandans have been calling on the leadership, because once there is political will, most things fall into line. Once you have an independent media, things fall into line. Because most people were asking, how come it took X, that's former Twitter, for us to start having a conversation on Parliament when there are journalists in the House, you know. So those are questions we really must answer. The other also is really the investment in the public sector. Because even if you're paying debts, you have a population of about 73%, which relies on education from the public purse and then also health, you know. So how can you say you are budgeting for a citizenry, majority of it young, and money is lost in corruption and in this other debt servicing? So I think for me it's important to deal with the loopholes that have made corruption thrive, and that's why I say for me political will is paramount, you know, in this conversation. The independent media, I don't know whether we'll get there, it's another, but also civil society and citizens, you know, for citizens to keep speaking. Because if you see what was going on X, you could see Ugandans are tired. And you see, the thing is, what corruption does, it also removes trust in government, you know. That's why at times when government officials speak, people are like, these are just jokers, you know. No one takes them seriously because the public has lost trust. Then you have taxes being increased, but people are not seeing. The measure of people losing trust is when you make a statement as a leader and people are just, you know, the responses usually will tell you whether they take you seriously. And then, of course, when there's a budget, what we expect is there will be shared prosperity. Okay? That it will not only be one group thriving, but there will be a level of equity, because the budget is also supposed to address issues of equity. Right now we're talking about Karuma. You know, we're talking about the whole of West Nile not being on the national grid, and yet we know that these are border districts which would add value to this country. A lot of trade happens in those areas, but they are never prioritized. So in the end, you find a country is losing money because they are not prioritizing the areas which could actually add value. The last is this budgeting where white elephants continue to receive money. Lubowa Hospital, you know, that's another area where I don't know why MPs keep allocating money to some of these things. So for me, my take is you cannot say you're going to thrive as a country if you do not address the loopholes in corruption. Even if you have a lot of money, you keep borrowing, it will just be in vain. So if we can deal with maybe ensuring that the systems or the leadership styles that have changed go back to what it was in Parliament then, where MPs actually spend time to scrutinize, but appreciate that they represent people. what I see increasingly is at times they think they represent themselves. That's why in the Nlengo, I was shocked. I'm like, how can you even speak like this to the taxpayer? In Lwengo, I am sure there are schools which
But
are
they
still...
clapped and applauded them.
Because you're dealing with a population maybe which is not very civically engaged and empowered. That if they give them these small crumbs, they then don't make the connection between a poor health service delivery, poor education, but they're waiting for handouts. In Kampala, some of those things don't happen because people are more civically engaged. People are more civically aware that there's a correlation between their life, their day-to-day lives, and the budget. But in many of those areas, people don't have information. So these leaders thrive on ignorance. And I think for me, the challenge for civil society, and here it's all of us who have information, is to make sure the citizens see the correlation between their life, education, health, and the budget, and then the lifestyle of their MPs.
All right. We have a comment from Okelo Patrick Bonyo from Busega. The current regime and the current opposition cannot fight corruption because they are part of it, maybe the next generation. We have a comment from Benon Fretu Inamasco on the budget. How could a whooping 14 trillion shillings surface in a corrigenda? This is 50% of the revenue to be collected by URA. That was the very first red flag. More comments coming in. Mr. Nicholas Opiyo, your take on this issue of our budget and the fight against corruption.
Kenneth, when you want to sweep stairs, you don't sweep it from down up. You sweep stairs from up down. I think in the fight against corruption, we are sweeping stairs from down coming up. That is not a very clever way.
That is sweeping the dust.
Upwards.
They normally tell us that
But you can
the bottom-up approach is the best way of doing things.
Make of it what you may, but the analogy that I'm making, don't divert me, is to say when you want to sweep stairs, you don't sweep it from down up. You sweep the stairs from up. What you saw in Luengo was exactly what Museveni has been saying. When his brother stole money for junk helicopters, he says, I forgive him because he invested the money here. That's what the speaker was repeating in Luengo. When the IGG launched a lifestyle audit, what did he tell her? In a public gathering, live on TV. Don't be careful. You might let them invest that money outside. So the speaker is just parroting what the president has been saying. So
The president didn't tell the commissioners to do that.
I'm not saying he sent them.
So then say it.
But he
said that
said the things they were saying in Luengo. That if somebody eats and shares with you, at least that's a better one.
Yeah, but the
That
president never said that.
No, he said it.
He did say that you share.
That you invest
Invest
here.
it here.
So
Take-
use your own words to
Invest
the
it
president.
here.
Invest
To
it
invest
here.
it here. We are saying what the president has said. In effect, we have normalized. We have given a rationale. The president may have meant something else, but that's how it has been interpreted and applied everywhere now. It's okay if you share. If you share, okay? Still, it is Robin Hood in Uganda now. It is Robin Hood. Still, from the rich guy, share with the poor guy, We have
Corrupt.
normalized corruption. So, Kenneth, if you want to sweep stairs, sweep it from up, downward. The second thing is this, and I speak about this with a heavy heart because Honorable Yusuf Mutembule was my classmate in law school for 5 years. I know him personally. He was the vice president of DP for Eastern Region before he was lowered close to the NRM and became an MP after failing twice.
Did you
What?
say was Liwad? It's
Sorry?
a consideration. He accepted to some terms.
Yeah, he was Wood.
Not
At the
Wood.
time he was
He
Wood.
even applied himself.
It's okay. We can talk about Bugisu politics outside of the show.
At least he can win. He couldn't win as DP.
I couldn't win.
All right.
But the evidence that I have seen that they were recorded bargaining for a percentage from the Human Rights Commission. If that is true, let them face their day in court. Let them face the consequence of the law. If there's corruption in Parliament, let us deal with it. The other day it was Mabati. We allowed those people to go scot-free
Which
and
people?
got...
They lost their jobs.
After firing the Gisu
I am
Queens.
talking about stairs
The two
up.
Gisu
I'm
Queens.
talking about the
The
stairs
two
up. The vice president, the speaker...
Bagishu minister.
No, it's really
You
the
even don't have a cabinet minister.
That is a
It's one
Bugisu
is
issue.
that's
Again,
it.
we shall discuss Bugisu
But you're
politics
still
outside of this. But the third thing is what I see as a fundamental problem of radical economists who have now joined the Ministry of Finance. We've had PPSTs in the Ministry of Finance who had their way around these issues, but you've got this group that came from nowhere who have now come to the Ministry of Finance who have taken a radical position, and that position is that Parliament has no duty in revising a budget. That the budget is prepared by the President, is laid in Parliament, and Parliament must not change it in any way, shape or form. It is a complete misreading of Article 155 of the Constitution. In any constitutional framework, there is the power of the purse. You cannot spend any money unless the legislature has appropriated. You prepare a budget and lay it to Parliament for discussions, for review and revisions, not as a matter of process. So there are these radical economic folks at the Ministry of Finance who have convinced the President that Parliament has no role, that the budget is really a manifesto of the winning government, Parliament cannot change it. And that Article 155...
But can the President, who has been around for quite some time, actually be, what do they call it?
Convinced.
Switched here and there?
He's changed his mind on a couple of things. Fundamentally, you've seen him somersault on a couple of things. Maybe he's convinced of that argument that they have made.
All right.
Maybe there is a political dividend to the argument that they have made. So the point that I'm trying to make is that these contestation between the executive and Parliament is arising out of, and this is the point that the NPA cannot tell you, the radical lots who came from nowhere, and by nowhere I mean Salim Saleh's group, the PPST and that group, have taken a reading of Article 155 that suggests that Parliament has no role. And this issue came up months ago. He was on radio and told MPs off. MPs were very unhappy. This is the climax of that interpretation of the role of Parliament in budgeting and appropriation.
All right. Gentlemen, this week, to be particular, yesterday, President Yoweri Museveni did preside over the release of the preliminary results from the National Housing and Population Census. We are now 45.9 million people, up from 34.6 million counted in 2014. That's an increase of 11.3 million people. Buganda is the most densely populated area. Women are 23.4 million, majority. 50.5% of the population is comprised of people who are below 17 years. What's the implication of these population figures, Honorable Mukitale?
You know, when we were discussing this corruption and the money in Parliament, I was looking at the age and sex pyramid, which in O level, I got to know. It's looking at the dependency, the structure of our demography, that the 50% of our population is school going. Another 20 is the youth, but most of them unemployed. So we are saying that we are having the productive group is just slightly over 20. So that level of dependency, for unless you are naive, unless you are indifferent, but if you really care about the good demographic dividend, it would worry you. And I wouldn't understand why anybody would take the issue of corruption just jokingly, because the task ahead of us is so huge. We are talking of entering the lower middle income, but when we have big challenges, because the good thing with that demography, that age and sex, the population structure, that age and sex pyramid, is that most of the 50% of is school going. That if you made the right intervention through a magic bullet of skilling, of vocationalizing the education system, a good curriculum, you could end up having a lot of technicians, a lot of all-round citizens who then can help you industrialize, can help you commercialize, can help you IT, innovation, science, and the country take off. So that's why for me I was trying to link the budget. If you said this the debate of the 750, we are putting all of it in relevant education system, skilling, vocationalization. then you are useful to Ugandans. But if it's going elsewhere, then we are just arguing on who is taking what. So, yes, we are saying the population growth has reduced. We used to talk about 3 point. We are now talking over slightly less than 3%. Now, in simple economics, we say to maintain the standard of living of and the well-being of a community, at 3%, you need close to 9% GDP, which we don't have. So that's why we are saying in NDP for strategic direction, we want to see a double-digit GDP growth. We want the economy to grow tenfold. So if we did that, that's when you can deal. Otherwise, we have a big task.
All right.
So many people, so many young people depending on very few working population. That cannot be something to celebrate. We should do everything possible to make sure that, and if we can keep more girls in school, it would further reduce the fertility rate, because a girl who produces at 25 on graduation will definitely not have more than 7 children.
All right.
But the one who leaves P7 to produce, you expect to produce at least minimum of 7. So these things requires serious intervention, and the intervention should be through the budget.
Honorable Mulongo, very quickly.
Yes, I think, thank you, Honorable Mukitale, as an economist, you said it well. The outcome of this was not surprising, because already the estimates were pointing towards this. But it only confirms the fact that in our planning, in terms of catering for the certain age groups, particularly the young people beyond 16 years and above, is now becoming a much more serious reality. And we cannot afford to ignore it, because these numbers are not good at all. The females are the majority, by almost 800, 900,000. In other words, in Uganda, in our structure of the population, women are more than men by close to 900,000. And this poses its own challenges. The question of marriage, the question of caring for that kind of excess, and it has issues. How do we deal with it? We must have policies to deal with it. And so on. You're going to have more singles.
Are you saying polygamy?
I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying it's an issue to deal with. The other one is
an economic issue.
Despite making up of the population of about the parliamentary seats, the issue of representation of women is a serious matter.
All right.
How are they going to be more than us, and yet they are so underrepresented? The other one is the issue of the early marriage. Actually, 34%. You're right when you pointed out. All right, between 20 and 24. All these
you have
things
a
are
president who is opposing family planning.
Yes, so we need to wake up and deal with
the
this.
nexus between
Not only catering for them,
all right,
but we should avoid the explosion that the youth are likely to be as a time bomb.
All right,
to deal with them politically and economically in the near future.
Mr. Nicholas Opiyo.
To be honest, I haven't read the population report. I've been in the countryside, so I don't want to comment on something I haven't read, just to be fair to your listeners. But just to note that population statistics are really, really important because they determine allocation of resources. Driving from Karamoja through Acholi, I was hard-pressed to understand why a government report would say that the highest rate of poverty was in Acholi sub-region.
All right.
Just information.
Right, very quickly.
The issue of
refugees. Your take on the population figures.
From over 2 million to 700 only.
Very quickly, Perry, as we come to the end of the show.
For me, I think the information should really inform planning. Because
right,
if you have a young population, that means your budgeting must be responsive to that population, and it must be properly sex disaggregated. If the girls are more, their needs and interests vary from the boys, so the budget must be responding to those needs, and we must deal with corruption so that the money that is being stolen by individuals goes into catering for this young population, which needs skills, which needs good health, so that it's productive. Thank you.
And next time we should talk about care work and gender roles.
Yes.
Where 14% are unpaid care work, domestic work. It's not recognized anywhere.
True.
and yet is a serious issue.
All right. I must thank you very much, my dear panelists, for actually making time to come here and discuss with us. And you, the listeners who spared your time to listening but also contribute to this discussion. Well, I've been your host, Kenneth Lukwago Anderson. On behalf of the team here in studio and the entire crew at Radio 1 FM 90, we wish you a fabulous weekend.